Hello everyone, I hope you're having a great day. In this video, I'm going to explain in detail how you can create a completely broken build by yourself. I will show you the key elements you need to consider in order to optimize your character to deal a lot of damage. This way you will be able to set the right stats, equipment and buffs for your build without having to look for a guide. I decided to make this video cause the next year I'm not going to be uploading build guides anymore, or at least not with the same frequency. I want to create more variety videos across Elden Ring, Dark Souls Saga and Bloodborne, or even more Souls games until we can play Erdtree. Nonetheless, I feel so blessed and grateful for having such an amazing community that I don't want to leave you guys on the no-hit build series without a detailed guide that allows you to understand the properties of your setup to obtain the desired results by yourself. I am also doing this video because I've seen a lot of complaints about the buff routines and similarities with multiple builds. Therefore, I'd like to explain what is the actual nature of the buffs and why I use very similar equipment in some of my characters. In the same way, don't worry, cause after this video I have 2 more overpowered builds to share with you and a fantastic top video to finish this amazing year and start a new one. So without anything further to say, what do you say if we begin with the tutorial? Okay guys, what we have here today is not a build at all, it's a character with a very high level. I have a 461 rune level character. Technically this is a build because we haven't reached the max level in this game, but as you can see, any stat that affects the damage in this game like strength, dexterity, intelligence, faith and arcane, all of them are on 80. This will allow us to get a great performance from the scale values of our weapons, and there is exactly where I want to start this guide. The weapons and their scale values are the base for your build. You are going to craft your builds around your weapons. You are not going to craft a build and then expect your weapons to work. It doesn't work like that. In Elden Ring we have 2 types of weapon, a unique weapon like the Sword of Night and Flame, which is perfect to explain my point in this video, and the non-unique weapons, which most of the time are infusible. The main difference between the unique and regular weapons is the way you upgrade them. With the unique weapons, as you know, we use somber smithing stones, while with the regular weapons we use the regular smithing stones. A regular weapon can be upgraded all the way up to plus 25, while a unique weapon can be only upgraded to plus 10. Most of the time this will help you to separate one from another. The main advantage of a unique weapon is that the weapon is already built, so the only thing you have to do is see the scale values, and according to the stats that scale better with these scale values, you are going to change the properties of your character. With the regular infusible weapons it's something different. To these weapons we can apply a wide variety of Ashes of War and select an affinity. The Ash of War is important, but the most important is the affinity. The affinity is what is going to decide what you are going to upgrade, and I will explain it with more detail a little bit later. In this case, how you are going to build the Sword of Night and Flame. The most important part of this weapon is its unique skill that allows you to use 2 attacks. The reason why I choose this weapon to explain this part of the video is that, as you can see, this weapon scales B with intelligence and faith and D with strength and dexterity. The intelligence and faith stats are going to increase the magic and fire damage. Intelligence will increase magic damage and faith will increase fire damage, while strength and dexterity are going to increase only the physical damage. As you can see as well, this weapon has a very wide requirements to be a weapon that you can obtain quite early. Nonetheless, the thing here is that with this weapon you can go with a fire build or with an intelligence build. I wouldn't level up intelligence and faith at the same level like 40 intelligence and 40 faith, because the result is not gonna be that great. I would rather to just leave intelligence at 24 to be able to use the weapon and level up faith all the way up to 60 to deal a lot of damage with the flame stance. But if you prefer magic, then you can leave faith at 24 and you can level up your intelligence to 50 or 60, and that way you will be building your character to obtain a desired performance with your weapon. At the level of this character it doesn't matter too much because we have 80 on every important stat, but in a 125, 150 or 200 build, the way you distribute your stats is gonna be the base that will allow you to deal the max amount of damage possible with your weapon. What I want you to understand here is that the weapon depends on your stats, and your stats will work with your weapon together. If you don't select your stats according to the weapon you are going to use, your damage is not gonna be high even if you stack a lot of buffs, and that's a point that I want to reach a little bit further in the video. Now, following the example with the Sword of Night and Flame, if you go and watch the video where I make a build for this weapon, in that specific video I decided to go with 80 on intelligence and 60 on faith, because I wanted to prioritize the magic attack, and because I can buff the fire attack with the hefty oil pots. This way I am trying to find a balance to use both properties of the weapon at the same time, but the main consequence of doing this is that I am not going to get the max performance from fire or from magic. I am getting a high performance from both, but not the max damage possible from one of them. What will I do now with my stats if I want to get the max damage with the Sword of Night and Flame? I would rather go with faith, because this stat is going to unlock a lot of buffs that I can use easily. If I only only level up Faith to 25, I can only use Golden Vow and Flame grant me strength. If I level up Faith to 33, I can use Golden Vow, Flame grant me strength, or Howl of Shabriri. What I am trying to say is that the more I level up Faith, the highest my fire damage or sacred damage is gonna be, while at the same time I'm unlocking multiple tools that I can use to increase my damage easily. While if I go with intelligence, I will have to spread my stats to at least reach Howl of Shabriri and then invest the rest of the points on intelligence, but there is an important investment on Faith already. So that's why in this case with the Sword of Night and Flame I would rather to go with fire, but that is completely up to you. The main purpose of this video is make you understand what are the keys that you have to change in order to obtain your desired results with your weapon. And I think that at this point we are pretty clear that depending on the scale values of our weapon and how the Ashes of War or the skill of our weapons work, we are going to decide which stats we are going to upgrade. And to finish with this part of the video, let's talk a little bit about the affinities and how the skills are affected by the stats. In this case we have the Fire Knight's Greatsword, which is a very powerful weapon from the DLC, which under the right build is capable to one-shot a lot of bosses, and you can see it on this video right here. So a great Ash of War to use with this weapon is the Royal Knight's Resolve. And the complicated part here for most of you guys will be which affinities should I choose, where a lot of affinities show me a very good scale values. For example, here we have an A scaling on strength, which is fantastic because the base damage of the weapon is already pretty good. So if your base damage is already pretty good and you have a good scale value, the damage is gonna grow dramatically. And the damage is gonna be a little bit better with the Keen affinity because I have an A scaling on dexterity and I also have a D scaling on strength, so I am getting benefit from both of my stats. But if we go to Occult, you will notice that my scale value on Arcane is gonna be A and my damage is gonna be even higher. So here is where it comes the question: which affinity should I choose? Will it be better to use the Occult affinity and level up my Arcane all the way up to 80, or going 80 with the strength for the heavy affinity, or 80 with dexterity for the Keen affinity, so or 60 strength, 60 dexterity for the quality affinity? And the real secret here is that you have to think what is your purpose with this build. In this case we are using Royal Knight's Resolve, which is an Ash of War that is going to buff our weapon for 10 seconds and it will boost our damage by 80%. This means that my target is dealing the highest amount of damage possible. And the cool part of this weapon is that the R2 deals pierce damage, which is one of the most effective type of physical damage of the game, which means that even if we are dealing a very low elemental damage like we are dealing right now on the quality affinity or on the Keen affinity, the damage is gonna be pretty good still because we have a lot of base physical damage and pierce damage. This means our weapon is gonna be effective against most enemies. However, what we want is to get the max amount of damage possible. And if we pay attention to the elemental affinities, we will notice that we have Flame Art and Sacred. If we use one of these affinities, we will get a dramatical impact in our elemental damage. In this case, the Flame Art affinity is the best for this weapon in most scenarios because this weapon has already innate fire damage, and that combined with the Flame Art affinity is going to be even better. If we are going to use the Flame Art affinity, the stat that we have to upgrade is Faith. And if we want to use the Sacred affinity to deal holy damage, the stat that we have to level is Faith again. So this means that we can deal two types of elemental damage by upgrading only one stat, and we will also get a minimal scaling with the strength and dexterity. Now if you don't feel convinced yet, try to do some math and summarize the numbers, and you will notice that the damage is dramatically better on Flame Art or Sacred on 80 Faith than Heavy Affinity on 80 Strength, or Keen Affinity on 80 Dexterity, or Occult Affinity on 80 Arcane. And that's exactly what we can verify right now with our high level character. Flame Art and Sacred are the most optimal because we can deal two types of damage, including the physical pierce damage that is innate on the weapon because it's a physical weapon, making of these affinities the best option to use with this weapon. And not only with this weapon, a lot of weapons like the Milady or most of the infusible weapons are going to work better with these two affinities on a high Fate level character. Now against the enemies that are weak to fire, we can destroy them with the Flame Art Fire Knight's Greatsword, and against those enemies that are resistant to fire damage, we can use the Sacred affinity and the problem will be solved. And if we are going to face an enemy that is highly resistant to elemental damage, we still have a very decent physical damage. Now I will explain how some stats affect the damage of the skills. In this case we have the Blasphemous Blade, one of my favorite weapons of this game. I do not consider it the best, but it's definitely a fantastic and solid weapon. As you can see, this weapon scales B with Faith, C with Strength, and C with Dexterity. dexterity. This means that we can level up strength, dexterity and faith, and our weapon is going to deal a very good amount of damage on each hit. In this particular case, Taker's Flame skill only scales with the weapon upgrade level and faith, which means that if we want to deal the max amount of damage possible with the skill, we have to focus on faith and on the upgrade level of the weapon, which means that we have to have a very decent level of faith and our weapon on the max level possible, which in this case is +10. Something similar happens with these two weapons. Euphoria Vortex will only scale with faith and Ancient Lightning Spear will only scale with dexterity. For some reason, all the projectile skills of this game will scale better with dexterity even if they scale with other weapons as well. Ice Spear is a great dash of war that is gonna work better with a combination between intelligence and dexterity rather than just going only with intelligence, despite of being a magic skill. However, what I will do in this case is instead of going, for example, 80 strength and 80 dexterity, I will go 60 strength and 99 dexterity to get the max damage of the skill, which is the main reason I will use the Bolt of Grandsax. So those are all the things that you need to consider when crafting your character. The cool part is that you can change your stats multiple times with Relana. Before going further into the video, I want to explain how I make to play multiple builds without running out of larval tears or any other element in the game. Let's say that I don't want to have less than 366 well-pickled turtlenecks. This means that what I have to do here is to create a backup of my save file, allowing me to play as much hours as I want, spending as much well-pickled turtlenecks as I want, even if I run out of them. And what I am going to do the next time I log into the game is that I am going to replace this new progress that I made with my previous backup save file that I left on my 366 well-pickled turtlenecks. This way you will never run out of larval tears, this way you will never run out of anything, and you will be able to play the game in the spot you left your character over and over and over. You can do that on PC, on PS4 or in Xbox, it doesn't matter. That can be done in any platform, and that is a very nice way to test multiple builds over and over and over without running out of resources. Now that we understand how the stats and the weapons work together and how those stats affect the skills as well, I want to quickly explain how are we going to decide which equipment we are going to use. In a lot of videos I recommend you to use the Raptor Optimista War. That is only if you don't want to take damage in some explosions or difficult attacks like the initial Commander Gaius charge attack or the Radan's explosion attack. But if you don't want to use it, just don't do it. It's up to you. Sometimes I tell you about the weapon with Seppuku or the Matting Hand or the Poisoned Hand, depending of the buffs we are going to use. But you are going to be deciding the equipment you are going to use according to your needs. The seal is probably the most important part after your weapon, because with this thing you are going to be casting your buffs or any other spell you find useful. And you will also be able to use some unique items like the Jellyfish Shield that will increase your damage if you use the Ash of War of this item, or even if you just equip it like the Matting Hand when you proc Madness. The reason why most of the time I use the Rakshasa's armor set with the White Mask or with the Black Dumpling is that this armor set increases our damage by 2% with each piece, which means that if we use 3 pieces like in this case, we are going to get a 6% damage boost in all of our attacks. It's a general boost for our damage. It will increase the damage of the skills, it will increase the damage of the attacks. And I combine it with the Black Dumpling to get a 10% damage boost with the Madness procs, or with the White Mask with the Bleed procs, or with the Mushroom Crown for the Poison procs. And that is the main reason why I use this setup consistently, because it's the best if you want to deal the max amount of damage possible. However, in this case this might not be the wiser idea, because we have the Marae's Executioner Sword, one of the best weapons of the game, probably one of my top 10 favorite weapons of this game, and that is because of the skill Eochaid's Dancing Blade. And as this weapon has the word dance in the name of the skill, this means that this ability is gonna be buffed by the Dancer's armor set, which in this case is a better option if we are going to use this weapon. Also, if we are going to use this weapon, I wouldn't use the Jellyfish Shield because I am not going to be benefited by it. In the same way as I'm not gonna be using bleed buffs, I'm gonna remove this one as well. And my equipment basically will look like this. Now, by using this armor set, we will increase the damage of Eochaid's Dancing Blade by a total of 10% or 11% more or less, which is actually a very decent buff. It's more than the Rakshasa's armor set without depending of a buff like the Matting buffs or the bleed buffs. And this is a great weapon because you don't depend on status effects. Now let's talk about the talismans. If you are going to be using R2 attacks like you will do with the Fire Knight's Greatsword, you will use the Axe Talisman, you will use the Spear Talisman, you will use the Two-Handed Sword Talisman. But what we are going to do here with this weapon is that we are going to use the skill, because the skill is the most important part of this weapon, because it's a very fast skill that will allow us to deal a lot of damage and which is also a chargeable skill that will be benefited with the God-free icon. To be able to decide which are the best talismans for our weapons, we need to be aware of what we are going to be doing, and we need to be aware of the effect of each talisman. What the Shard of Alexander does is that it increases the potential of the skills by 15%. What the God-free icon does is that it increases the potential of the charge skills by 15%, and it will stack with the Shard of Alexander. So just by combining these two talismans with a charge attack of the Eochant's Daisy Blade, we are going to get a dramatical amount of high damage. And for the next talismans, we need to know what is the skill doing. If it's a skill that deals fire damage, I guess you are going to use the Fire Scorpion Charm. If it's a skill that uses magic damage, you are going to use the Magic Scorpion Charm. If it is a skill that builds up bleed like the Waterfall Dance, then you might use the Millicent's Prosthesis, but you can also use the Lord of Blood's Exaltation and the White Mask to be benefited by those buffs. In this case, we have a skill that attacks at a very fast speed, which means that we can get the most out of the successive attacks buffs, which is the Millicent's Prosthesis that stacks successfully with the Rotten Windsor Insignia. This one will increase our damage by 11% on its max tier, and it will stack with the 13% max tier of the Rotten Windsor Insignia. Now with the Flask of Wondrous Physic is the same. In this case, I have to tell you that I wouldn't use any other tier but the Blood-Sucking Crack tier. If you are going to gain a 20% damage boost just by default, take it. It's very easy to use, you don't have to think about it. It lasts 3 entire minutes, and the cost of it is that it will be draining our HP slowly on time, but it's actually very slow. So it's a free 20% damage boost. And now I ask you, which will be the other tier we will be using? Will I be using the Flame Shrouding Crack tier? Will I be using the Spike Crack tier, which increases the charge attacks? No, I wouldn't be using any of those tiers. I will be using the Thorny Crack tier that increases the potential of the successive attacks buffs by a maximum of 20% if I'm not wrong. But I know it's gonna work because it will stack with the Millicent's Prosthesis and the Roaring Windsor Insignia, creating a massive buff when dealing multiple hits. And you can see the results of making this combination in this video right here. And now it's time to talk about the buffs and some optional items that I use that affect the builds directly, but that are less important than you think. Or better say, these last things wouldn't be nothing if you don't do the first part correctly. Let's start with the items that help you passively. The items that don't affect your damage directly but help you in another way. For instance, we will use the Pickled Turtle Legs. I love this item because I play very aggressively. Like, I will try to be attacking the enemy constantly. I will not stop harassing the enemy until I destroy him. But what happens in this game when you attack repeatedly multiple times is that you are going to be losing your stamina, and that is why I always tell you, be sure to grab some Pickled Turtle Legs to boost your stamina regeneration speed. It's because I play so aggressive that if I don't use this item, my stamina is going to regenerate so slow, and I am not going to be able to keep that fast pace that I like to play with. So as you can see, this item might not be that important for you, but it is for me, and I think it might be useful to you. That's why I share it with you, but I try to establish that is completely optional. Other items that I frequently use are the pots. These things are pretty useful for multiple purposes. In this case, this freezing pot will apply frostbite on the enemy if you manage to build the right amount of frostbite. This regular version of the freezing pots will deal like 350 build up, which is gonna proc frostbite immediately on enemies like Malenia or Radagon. But against enemies like Radan, you might need even one of these and one hefty freezing pot to be able to proc the effect, but it has that aid that is not direct damage. Another good example could be the sleep pots that will allow you to sleep some enemies like the Ghostskin Duo. If for some reason you are still struggling with the Ghostskin Duo, just use these items and you will sleep those guys to forever, and you will be able to destroy them before they even wake up. And now let's talk about the buffs and debuffs. First of all, there are 3 types of buffs in this game: the aura buff, the body buff, the unique buff, and the weapon buffs. Let's begin with the aura buffs. There we have the Commander's Standard skill, which is Railing Standard, that will increase your damage by 30% but for only 30 seconds. We have Golden Vow on his Ash of War version that I don't remember the values, but I will always prefer the Golden Vow spell version that will increase our damage by 25% or 20% for around a minute and a half, which is a lot of time. So I will always use Golden Vow spell version. It's the greatest aura buff for me. The thing here with the types of buff is that you can't stack 2 of the same type. For example, if I use Golden Vow and then I use Railing Standard, I will be replacing Golden Vow with this last use of the Railing Standard. If I use first Railing Standard and then I use Golden Vow, I will be replacing the effect of Railing Standard. That will happen with any other buff of the same type. Now let's talk about the body buffs. Here we have the Blood Boil Aromatic, which is going to increase our physical damage by 30% for 60 seconds. It's the best body buff for physical damage. Then we have the one that I consider the most useful, which is Howl of Shabriri. This one increases all types of damage, including physical, fire, magic, holy, lightning, every type of damage by 25% for 40 seconds. But it will also increase the damage you take by 30% or 25%, something like that. But it actually doesn't matter because you are buffing your character a lot. And last we have Flame Grant Me Strength that increases your physical and fire damage by 20% for only 30 seconds. That one is the least of my favorite because it is only a good alternative when you are using a fire damage build where for some reason you are not going to invest a lot on faith, which I find really not that useful, because if you are going to use a very powerful fire build, then you need to invest your points on faith, and that will unlock Howl of Shabriri automatically, and that will also unlock the Midra's Flame of Frenzy that will allow you to build up madness quickly, to easily proc the madness buffs, which are other types of buffs that I want to talk right now. Here we can mention the bleed buffs with the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, the White Mask, the H1's Exaltation with the Black Dumpling and the Madding Hand, the Kindred of Blood's Exaltation with the Mushroom Crown or the Poison Hand, or the Saint Trina's Smile, which is a new buff that was included in Shadow of the Erdtree that boosts your damage by 20% for 30 seconds when sleep occurs in the vicinity. This one is in my opinion the least useful, but the thing with these unique buffs, specifically with the talisman buffs and the helmet buffs, equipment buffs basically, that it doesn't mean they are not unique, they can be stacked together compared to an aura or body buff or even a weapon buff. A very good example of a unique buff can be Contagious Fury from the Jellyfish Shield. This one is currently increasing our damage by 12.5% if I'm not wrong, but the thing with this one is that you can't use any Ash of War. You have to use the basic movement of the weapon. This one is pretty good when using Royal Knight's Resolve, for example. Instead of going for the two-hand, you go for the Jellyfish Shield. That right now, this one is not as good as the two-handed Sword Talisman, so it's something that you have to think. It will depend on the weapon and how it works. But by using one of these buffs, you are going to go wild on damage. Just think about the 20% of the H1's Exaltation, the 10% of the Black Dumpling, and the 7.5% of the Madding Hand. The same full setup can be done with Poison, and that is a massive increase on your damage. Finally, the weapon buffs are those that you can apply on your weapon. Seppuku is one of them. This one helps you to trigger the bleed buffs, and it also applies a buff to the weapon that increases its physical damage, its base damage by 30 flat points, and increase the bleed build up by 30 as well. But you can also buff your weapon with greases, with crack blade, with blood flame blade, for example. But something very interesting about the weapon buffs is that some of them cannot be used with certain affinities. In this case, Seppuku is one of those weapon buffs that can be applied on an occult affinity weapon. Because if you use any other weapon with occult, you cannot buff it with greases, you cannot buff it with blood flame blade or electrify armament or scholar's armament, so you have to be aware of that as well. Another important unique buff could be the pots, specifically the hefty and regular oil pots that increases your next fire damage instance by 75% or 50% depending on the version you are using, but it's something that is very useful and is going to help you to deal a lot of more damage as well. But if you want something simple that is gonna be powerful as well, just use your physic, then your aura buff, which is Golden Vow, and then your body buff, which can be Bloodboil Aromatic or Howl of Shabriri, and that's it. That is basically the buff routine that I show you every time. But what I don't understand is what you think that is too long. It's just too simple. Sometimes we have to add some additional steps, like in a dual bleed build, we use Seppuku on both weapons, then we go. Or if we want to use the madness buffs, we build up the status effect first, then we use Howl of Shabriri to proc it. Or if we want to counter the HP drain effect of the blood-sucking character, we use Blessing of the Erdtree. That is also a unique buff because it doesn't affect Howl of Shabriri or Golden Vow. So it's not an aura buff, it's not a body buff, the only thing it can be is a unique buff. Last but not least, I'd like to tell you that your equipment and your buffs are just multipliers of the base of your build, which is your weapon and your stats. If you don't have a solid base for your build, your buffs are going to be meaningless. It will not matter if you use the Rakshas as armor set, it will not matter if you stack a lot of unique buffs. If you don't set the right stats for your weapon, if you don't set the right affinity for your weapon, if you not build your character correctly from that first part, your damage is not gonna be high. So the potential of the build doesn't depend on your buffs or your equipment. The potential of the buffs and how they will affect your build depends entirely on how you craft it initially. If you consider all these recommendations, especially this last one, when you focus on the first part of creating your build, build your weapon, your stats, the affinity, or the things that you want to do with your weapon. If you do that part correctly, the rest is gonna be extremely easy and you are going to easily craft an extremely powerful build. I invite you to follow this guide with your favorite weapon and let me know the results you obtain. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Be sure to drop a like and subscribe to my channel for more Elden Ring content. Have a great day guys, my name is Carlos and I'll see you in the next one.